All right, so we're going to rerun this deployment script one more time. Now, before I did that, let's just review that very quickly. You'll see the first step of running this deployment is to log into your Azure account. So we expect Azure will pop up with a modal dialog box and we'll have to enter our user ID and password. It will run some commands like select Azure subscription to choose our subscription. It checks to see that the resource group already exists, and if it doesn't, then it creates a new resource group. So the resource group creation is part of this deployment script. And then it does the deployment. So it's new hyphen Azure RM resource group deployment. That is what kicks off the deployment, takes in the template file, the parameter file, and the resource group name. One thing that I added to this was the parameter name deployment name. This is a funny script because it requires, let's go back up here. Deployment name is a required parameter, but then it's never used. So I decided to name the deployment as what I tell it. All right, so I'm going to pause this. I'm going to start up PowerShell, and then we're going to continue. So I just started Windows PowerShell. First thing we're going to do is we're going to switch over to the directory in which our script is stored. And so I'm going to cd to that directory. Unfortunately, the directory name is really long, and it's going to wrap around some of these commands. Now, before we can execute the script, like you might be tempted to just say, deploy. You might be tempted to do that, but then that will give you an error. Actually, I can show that to you. This will not work because there's this thing called execution policies, and this PS1 file is an unsigned file, and we have restrictions by default within PowerShell. So I've got a command here that is called set execution policy, and we're going to copy this command, paste it into the PowerShell window, and it's basically saying, do we want to turn off execution policy protection? And yes, we do. So I'm going to say yes. And now we can run the deployment file. But even then, the deployment does take some parameters. So besides deploy.ps1, we have to pass in our subscription ID, we have to give it a resource name, and we have to give it a deployment name. These are mandatory parameters in that script. Okay, I'm going to copy that. So what this will do is this will create a brand new resource group, and then we'll deploy those changes that we made. Okay, so I'm going to actually just let her rip. Now it's going to ask me to log in. So I'm going to need to get my user ID and password here. Right. And now it's going to, it's going to then check to see that our resource group already exists. Right, registering all the resource providers, and it's saying resource group does not exist. So we actually have to create this resource group. I'm going to put that into Central US region. It's asking me which region, so I put Central US. And it's going to create the resource group. It says succeeded. So we saw this in the script. Now it's calling that new Azure RM deployment, Azure RM resource group deployment commandlet, and it's going to basically create those resources for us. Now if I flip over to the portal, we can actually see that in action. You see the resource group was just created, and now I'm starting to see resources showing up: a virtual network, IP address, network interface, NSG. We can go into the deployments folder, and we can see the deployment is underway, and the virtual machine is in progress here. Okay, there's a little thing. So our resources are being deployed, and we can actually watch it be created. Going back to the PowerShell, it's still running. So I'm going to let that run, and then we can see how that worked. All right, so the PowerShell script is completed. Remember, the PowerShell, the JSON template had an output, and that output was the admin username. So this signifies that the template was successfully deployed. We can minimize that, go back to the portal, and we can see that it also confirms that the deployment is complete. So if I go back to the AZ102RG, I can see that we have network security group, VMs, disk, network interface, virtual network. So everything that we had in our template is there. So you can see that you can do a deployment in the portal, download the JSON templates, modify them, modify the parameters, modify even the deployment script, run it, and then you'll get resources created automatically.